Hi everybody out there, welcome to Donegal Railway Heritage Centre. I'm here with Peter Scott MBE, who's going to give us a talk on the overhaul of Drumboe and all the work they carried out up there. Over to you, Peter.
Right, thank you for that introduction. Just by way of further introduction, I have recently retired as locomotive officer of the Railway Preservation Society. I continue to be involved at the moment with Heritage Engineering Ireland, which is the engineering subsidiary of the RPSI. Both organisations, originally the RPSI and then later Heritage Engineering, have been involved in the restoration of the locomotive Drumboe. It wasn't my first encounter with Drumboe. My first encounter was actually when I was a schoolboy, aged about 9 or 10, when the locomotive was lying derelict at Strabane after the County Donegal Railway had closed. And at that time I looked at it and thought, oh, wouldn't it be nice to have one of these? A little boy of 9 or 10, I hasten to add. And I never dreamt for one moment that a few years later I'd be involved in the restoration work on the engine. Anyway, this talk covers the various stages in the overhaul or partial overhaul, because it's by no means overhauled fully to functional operation, but the overhaul work to date that was done at Whitehead by the RPSI and later, as I say, by Heritage Engineering. Now, I'm told if I press this button, something will happen. There we go. Right, this talk was first produced for the Railway Preservation Society, one of their monthly meetings during the winter in 2021. It starts, I suppose, as all good railway journeys or operations of any sort start with a timetable. That's the Donegal Railway Timetable, 1958, I think. And then a few photographs of the way things used to be. They all show locomotive Drumboe in various guises. A goods train there on the Letterkenny line at Strabane, crossing the bridge between Strabane and Lifford. And then, sadly, things went a wee bit wrong after that. The railway closed at the end of 1959. The stock was preserved in inverted commas, at least it wasn't disposed of at that time, because some of it had actually been acquired by an American gentleman with the intention of setting up a railway in the United States. But things didn't quite go to plan, and the stock deteriorated badly. The locomotives Drumboe and Meanglass are shown there, still lying at Strabane a few years later. No track now. And then, in a very dishevelled state, Drumboe in store at Ballybuffet in the 1990s, where it is now minus chimney, minus front of the smoke box, minus cab, but at least it still existed. And later than that, it was moved to Donegal town here. That's round the back of the shed there, just 100 yards from where we are now. And then in 2006, it was moved to Whitehead in County Antrim, to the Railway Society RPSI premises, after the Donegal Society had managed to obtain interreg funding for certain remedial work to be done to it. It is shown there on its transporter wagon, which is a wagon that we use at Whitehead for moving 3-foot gauge vehicles about the yard. Another view of Drumboe. That is the way it had been cosmetically restored and had been situated here, more or less where it is now, of course, for several years. That photograph's slightly interesting because it shows Drumboe on its wagon, and beside it our own 264 NCC tank engine, also a 264, a larger machine, but because of the way those engines are sitting, it doesn't exactly look quite so large. We were contracted, the RPSI was contracted to do certain specific jobs on the engine. One of them was to renew the smoke box door and the chimney. When we dismantled the smoke box, we found that the chimney consisted of a concrete drain pipe. Now, it actually looked quite well from a distance, but it wouldn't have been a very good steaming arrangement, I'm afraid. The boiler was lifted out, and that is it with its new chimney which we built and a new smoke box door. The frames of the engine, was just explaining earlier on when we were looking around the engine as it is now, that we had extreme difficulty in getting it dismantled because of corrosion. We had to make special jacks to try and get the axle boxes removed from the horns. The various photographs here I'll run through fairly quickly. They show there one of the driving wheel sets at our wheel lathe at Whitehead. Trying to find the centre of the crank axle. Machining in the wheel lathe. That's a colleague of mine, Brian Hill, who works the wheel lathe. And another job done there on a boring machine, which is to true up the crank pins. And there you can see the crank pin looking a bit more shiny after having been machined. The bogie and pony truck from the engine are sitting one on top of another, awaiting restoration. We had to renew all the axle box covers, which consist of a cover and a flap that you slide to the side for oiling purposes. Oh, now that is the connecting rod, one of which was missing, being forged onto the dies of the blacksmith's hammer. Looking rather warm for a day like this, I must say. I should point out at this stage that we were contracted to do certain specific jobs, but we sort of caught the bug and did an awful lot more restoration-wise than was called for. A lot of volunteer hours went into making the various bits and pieces. The connecting rod, missing part of it, being one of the items. That's the new connecting rod. And there again the existing ones and the new one, the shinier looking one. That's it again, after having been machined. The business end of it with the keyway. If anyone wants to come in and comment, by the way, or ask what's going on, or get me to explain anything, by all means shout out. There again is the various connecting or coupling rods and connecting rods for the engine with their bushes in place.
Are they bronze? Huh?
Yes, indeed they are. They're bronze bushes and a white metal lining. Oh yes, that's the return crank, which was rather an awkward forging. Oh, here's a bit of light relief. A job that we were also asked to do was the Wickham inspection trolley, and which arrived, as you can see, in bits and pieces, not much left of it. The Wickham trolley, a 3-foot gauge trolley, there were thousands of these things made, inspection trolleys, for railways all over the world, and they got more and more sophisticated as time went on. This one wasn't sophisticated. It was extremely basic, and it consisted of 4 wheels and a frame and a wee petrol engine and a very rudimentary gearbox and 2 wooden seats.
Were they always
petrol engine, or was there diesel engines?
I don't know. I'm not that well up in the Wickham trolleys. I think once they got larger, I imagine there were diesel engine ones. That is the wee Borden-na-Mona, ex-Borden-na-Mona Ruston engine, and the Wickham trolley in completed form with back-to-back seats on it. Well, the engine didn't exist at all. We had to fit a modern Honda engine, but the gearbox was, as it arrived, fortunately, it was still functional. That's myself having a wee bit of a drive. It then went to Mullen Boys, which was on the Killybegs line, and I'm not sure what the situation is there now. Don't know if anyone can enlighten me.
We actually went down, Peter, for the anniversary, 60th anniversary of the line's closing, and we actually ran the Wickham trolley on it. Still, the track's still there.
Is that right?
And the guy's very committed.
That's good.
Very committed to.
So the trolley's still working then?
Yes.
Yep.
Oh, good. I'm delighted to hear that. I'm glad we got something right. There's a few of our team playing themselves on about 100 yards of track. That's Mullen Boys as it used to be in the good old days. And that's as it is now. With the porch of the house is still the same, but I don't think anything. The trees in the background are a bit bigger, but I don't think anything else is much the same as it was. A few of our fellows having a run up and down on it. Anyway, back to Drumboe. Major work was called for on the frames of the engine. One of the main frames was actually cracked and had been repaired, and corrosion was really serious in the latter part of the frames, i.e. under the coal bunker and the footplate. And we actually cut out the last section like that, and there it is, the removed section. I don't know whether, if I can point at that, along there you can see where the corrosion is, and that was a stretcher, or a patch plate there where the crack was. So all that was in fact cut out and renewed with new plate work, which you can see there being welded into place. And the bracket repositioned. The front, sorry, not the front, the rear headstock was replaced, rear buffer beam. It was also seriously corroded. The cylinder blocks, both of them had suffered cracking in exactly the same place. It was obviously a slight design problem. They were sent away and repaired by a metal lock process, which is like a metal stitching process rather than welding. There were frame repairs done in the way of the cylinder block as well. That's the cylinder block. Cylinder block just back from being repaired by metal lock.
And why that rather than welding?
Well, old castings, they don't sometimes weld terribly well, and if it's a good clean crack which just needs held together, the metal lock process is very effective. If it starts cracking, well, it shouldn't start cracking again, because so it's like interwoven brickwork almost, give a building analogy. Whereas a weld, if it starts cracking again, it could run through it. Oh, that's a very similar cylinder block on the Mogul locomotive project that we're working at Whitehead at the moment, just by way of comparison. The bogie frames likewise were really unserviceable due to serious corrosion. That's the new frames with the axle boxes and horn blocks in place. Once we got to that stage, the locomotive was fairly complete as far as we could go. We couldn't really justify any more volunteer time on it. We'd done the contracted work, etc. So it's there on the piece of 3-foot gauge, 3-foot gauge track at Whitehead. Oh yes, that's the rear bogie. Compared with the rear bogie on our 264 tank engine, which looks slightly different but really is the same layout. The pony truck on Drumboe and the pony truck on our engine, which is different to the extent of the wheel is outside the springs, but apart from that the concept is the same. Oh, that's an absolutely horrible thing that I threw in just for a bit of shock treatment. That was the Seven Oaks derailment, where number 800 River Cray 264 tank engine came off the road in serious style and caused a very serious accident. I put it in one respect that pretty well every 264 tank engine that I've ever heard of, and there have been dozens of different designs, every railway engineer seemed to have his own idea of designing one. They were all very successful except these ones. So Drumboe's not like that, by the way, I can assure you. General view of the workshop at Whitehead showing number 85, the compound engine boiler, Drumboe beside it, and away in the background an Orenstein couple engine for Downpatrick. A sister engine to Drumboe, Mean Glass, was also brought to Whitehead for not a complete overhaul this time, but a cosmetic overhaul. You can see Drumboe's boiler in the background. The blue engine is our Guinness shunting engine. Now, that's on the wagon awaiting attention is the bunker and the cab for Drumboe, which was in such dreadful condition that when we came to put the engine back into partially restored condition so that it could come back here for display purposes, we really couldn't have remounted that on it. That would have been like throwing bad money after good or something. So we recovered what we could from the existing cab and bunker. We rebuilt the decking and the side angles, and that is the bunker being tried into position. The boiler shown there, we have done very little to other than blast clean it and make it more presentable looking, apart from of course the new smoke box and chimney that we got at an earlier stage. That's the boiler having been blast cleaned, and the cladding straps made for it, some of the new boiler cladding in the front there. The dome casing is one of the more elaborate, tricky things to make, but we tried our hand at a bit of metal spinning. That disc there, that's shown on the wooden former, the disc is actually squeezed with a bar or a roller in this case to make it into the shape of the former, like that. That's myself and Bob Skingle there looking critically at it. And then the top part of it, only the top section is made by spinning, the rest of it is just cylindrical, and the two are welded together. That's the finished article being tried in place, with the new cladding all in place.
Was it originally steel?
Yes, yes, it's thin, it's about 1.5 millimeters or maybe 2 millimeter thickness of steel sheet. One thing you have to watch when spinning is that the metal will thin as you get out to the edge, and you come to a stage where it actually begins to buckle and crack. Before you get to that stage, well, you've really reached the end of the spinning, and you have to modify or reduce the cylindrical section a wee bit to get the two to make up. That shows the cab surround, which as you can see there is pretty dreadfully corroded. We really just threw those bits away and made new ones. Sections for the cab. all this work was pre-cut out by laser cutting. The back rolling the back plate of the toolbox, which whatever awful person designed the engine decided it had to be circular or semicircular in shape and given no end of problems, and if they couldn't simply have made it square or a slight angle in it and made the sheet metal worker's job a lot better. Anyway, that's the back of the bunker. Bunker well on its way to completion. And one of the original jobs that the RPSI did was the making of 2 new side tanks, which are shown here. We cleaned them down again. They'd been sitting for a long time, since 2006 to really a couple of years ago, so they needed cleaned and repainted. The interior of the cab. Oh yes, I was talking about that earlier. When you take the dome lid off, you're met with the regulator valve, which is pretty perfect in condition by the looks of it, mainly because nobody could get at it. But it's sitting there, just ready for action. It's looking out the driver's window. And the engine ready for its journey back here. Number 5, but as far as we could make out, the number 5 was always a painted numeral on the side of Drumboe's cab. Some of the engines had a plate, a cast brass plate, but that I don't know if anyone has better photographs. We couldn't find a decent photograph of the 5, and we had to look at some very grotty old black and white photographs. But that's the best the sign writer could do, and I think he made a reasonable job. The whistle certainly is authentic, it's off the drawings. I should mention maybe just there that one of the good things about working at Drumboe is that we actually have the original drawings, which the Irish Railway Record Society were able to turn up. Good in one respect, but I stress the word original. The boiler shown is not a superheated boiler, for example. So you just have to be a wee bit careful. Any engine during its life gets modified. The things that didn't quite work to satisfaction get thrown away, and the things that improve it are fitted. So you've just got to... You find things that aren't in the position sometimes. Well, we didn't find that with Drumboe so much, but with 131, our own engine that we were working at, we found that the reverser is mounted in a different place. Nobody told us. Anyway, so just wee things you have to watch out for. That's some of the team there at Whitehead, ready to wave goodbye to the engine. That's it being loaded by BT's crane onto the Wagner. What do you call the chap who did that?
Edwin Kirk.
Edwin Kirk, yes, of course, that's right. So that's loaded on Edwin's transport, and that's leaving the yard at Whitehead and getting back to more into her known territory, Barnesmore, not too far from where she should be running.
Just up there.
Yeah, there we go again, and there's what it used to look like. And there's causing a stir in the middle of Donegal town, a traffic jam, I'm sure, in front of the Abbey Hotel. I don't know whether they're cheering or singing or bored there.
Those are happy faces.
You got in there, I think, Kevin, right?
The wee fella that was rubbing his hand up and down as if it was a pet. He was patting it and rubbing it.
Oh, really?
He thought it was like a dog. Somebody get the new pup. That's what he reminded me of.
Yes.
Did you
So-
mention the whistle, Peter, blowing that all the way through?
Oh, no, I didn't. See, I wasn't there, so I didn't hear the whistle blowing, but
Mark put a bit crack in it.
I'll put the compressor on now afterwards and we can blow the whistle.
all right. Right, well, that's the engine lifted off I didn't tell you any more about that. You know more about that than I do. That's her under her canopy. And just to hark back to finish with to the way things used to be, train entering Strabane from Derry and heading up the Finn Valley. That's the map where it all should be, of course, and the advertising brochure, and the finish, Burnsmore Gap again.
Well done.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you for that.
Excellent. Memories there.
And for all of those you watching online, I'm going to end the broadcast here, and you can watch it back at your pleasure. Thanks for tuning in.